Our next question is kind of a good segue from that. What led you to choose the research/academia route? Some of you touched on your past experiences, but if you have anything to share about why you picked research and academia versus industry or some other route, we'd love to hear about that.
I can give it a shot. So at least for me, I did not plan to go into research, or at least academic research at all. I think, so at least from undergrad and through the first part of master's, that was, my plan was to, I think around the time, you may not remember, but the X Prize was a big thing then, as a commercial space was just getting off the ground. And so my plan was to go work for one of those small aerospace companies. But I ended up really liking research and, the freedom for creativity that it gives, and the ability to take risks that I think is not as common in perhaps a more structured or perhaps, deadline or funding runway focused industry space. So just ended up sort of switching gears and doing that because I realized I liked it a lot. And then, I'd say the path to what I'm doing now in research is sort of, again, not exactly what intended originally, but, and I'm happy to go into that in more detail, but it works out so that you're generally working on interesting problems, whatever they may be. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll go. I started research when I was a junior at UC Berkeley. I was in a biophysics lab, and I would say that I wasn't the greatest student before I started doing research. I think I didn't really feel strongly connected to my coursework, and so for me, it was a big change in feeling a lot more connected to the coursework I was doing when I started doing research. I think always in my mind, after my bachelor's, I always thought I should get a job, support myself, make some money, that kind of stuff. Like that was always the ultimate goal. I did an internship between my third and fourth year at a local biotech company, and I didn't really enjoy it that much, to be honest. It was okay, but then I enjoyed my research at the university much more, and so it was at that time that I started to think about whether I could continue to research more as a long-term profession. And so from that point, I kind of looked around in the research experience I had. And so you have access to graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, staff scientists, and just being around the lab and talking to them, I could really get a stronger sense of like whether that was a good route for me. So for me, it was probably in my senior year of undergraduate, so pretty last minute, that I decided that I wanted to continue to do research.
I think I would add to the conversation that the difference between academic research and industry research might be one in terms of where you are on the product development pipeline. And so if you really enjoy pushing the envelope and doing things that are risky and no one has ever looked at, that I think is what you tend to find a bit more in academic research, as opposed to industry, where it may be optimizing a product or doing something new and novel, but it's within the scope of an existing area that the company is working on. So I think they tend to be different. And so different people are drawn to each one, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's what's the best fit for you.
For me, I was just too curious and maybe stubborn to be not on my own, maybe. I did start research as soon as I transferred to North Carolina State University, partly because I thought I wanted to do more like math philosophy or something. I was really lost, clearly. But then they basically, at school, they told me, my advisor was telling me how NC State was really good school for like science. So I was either was going to go more financial application or biology or like aerospace type research. And so I gave it a shot. I liked it. I got into the next year, got into the research experience for undergraduate program. And I just loved it. So, and so the idea of like always being curious and pushing the agenda forward, because basically you get out of research partly what also you put in. And so I was putting a lot in. And so I was really happy that I was able to have a manuscript, like my first year of grad school. So yeah, so I did try for personal reasons, try the route of a private in a pharmaceutical company. It was a very, like I liked the team. They were great. They seem actually, often people say that they're not big into mentoring, but I did find it that they were very big into mentoring and trying to recruit and help me grow as a scientist. But it was also with a company that they were going to be losing a patent to one drug soon. So it could have just been maybe a year, maybe 5 years that I will be working on this particular project. And to me, I just felt like I couldn't, like, if I'm curious about something and investigating something, I didn't just want to have to drop it whenever the patent died or ended and there was not much interest economically from the company. So, and then finally, I really like teaching. I like students. In math, we had to teach TA students, even if we had research funds. And so, and I really liked it. And I felt like that really helped me with my research. Like that's when I really rocked, all like calculus, differential equations and all those classes, because then I really, if you have to teach it, I feel like that's when you really learn it. And so, and that interaction with students was always my favorite. So I realized that those two things really pushed me into just going into academia.
I would like to add a little bit on, from my side about what is nice about the social aspect of research. So I definitely second like what my colleagues have said about like how cool it is to do research, your creativity, the fact that you have very little restraints about what ideas you can put in place. That's really exciting. For me, also what I like about academia is the environment that you find in a university. So when I went from Mexico, southern Mexico to Sweden, it was a shock for me, right? You can imagine that you will feel weird, right, with meeting all these like tall people, blonde, but still super cool people. I really felt very welcome, and I like the fact that they found me different, but still like very, very kind of like receptive and trying to know where I was from and asking me to cook, to prepare tacos, because they assumed that I was an excellent taco cooker and preparing all this guacamole thing. So that was a very nice experience. And I realized that at university, normally, there's always a nice environment where people tend to be more like open, more inclusive. And, not just in terms of like research, but like just in general in ideas, right? About how people discuss about different subjects, and also meeting people from different places, right? Like playing football. I love soccer, and it was really cool to be playing soccer with people from Africa, from Asia, from all over the place. And I think that is very cool about universities, that you find so many people from very diverse backgrounds. And so despite these differences, people find ways to always find common place. And this environment of academia, I really like it and I love it. And that's one of the main reasons why I still like academia. Thanks.
Maybe I can add, and I agree with all of my colleagues regarding motivations that lead typically folks to the academic route. Research, of course, being important for me as well. And as a teaching professor, I would also emphasize what also Dr. Valdez-Jasso said about so important the motivation to teach students, and also the wonderful experience I had during coursework throughout my undergraduate studies, which in a way almost seduced me to continue coursework as a graduate student and to apply my knowledge on research projects. So ultimately I chose academia in big part because I wanted to offer to students that same experience that I had.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to add anything? If not, we can move on to the next question. So now that we've learned a little bit about why you chose the research and academia route, can you please give us a brief description of your current research projects? I'm sure we're all dying to know what you all research. So who wants to go first?
I can go first here, I guess. So yes, I'm in the mechanical and aerospace engineering department, mostly focused on robotics, mostly surgical robotics. So I'm also part of the Department of Surgery. We have a great medical school at UCSD as well. So most of my work focuses on kind of non-traditional surgical robots. So not the sort of large, rigid robots that you typically see, but more of the flexible sort of snake-like continuum robots. And we're typically looking at how can we design these to be sort of systems that can help with minimally invasive surgery so that patients can recover faster and without as many complications. And so we do a lot with mechanical design, with the controls aspect as well, and the user interface for controlling these types of surgical robots.
Who wants to go next?
So I'll take a stab at that. You may have noticed that Dr. Kwon and I have very similar furniture in the backs of our office, meaning that we're in the same building. So her lab and my lab we're both at the Sanford Consortium for Regenerative Medicine. It's a building that is actually not on the engineering part of campus, but is affiliated with the School of Medicine. My lab in particular, we do a lot of work with stem cells and cancer to understand how the microenvironment can dictate what those cells do. What do they become if they're stem cells, or how do they metastasize or form tumors if they're cancer cells? And then how can we use that therapeutically to our advantage to create a device or a therapy to help better identify or treat those patients respectively.
Since I'm just upstairs from Dr. Engler, I'll go next. So my lab is really interested in developing new technologies for traumatic brain injury, and that's mostly because currently there's not any therapeutics that improve the long-term brain health of people who've had brain injuries. And so in particular, we work at making materials on the nanometer length scale, so between around 5 nanometers to about 300 nanometers big, in order to try to get drugs more efficiently or more specifically into the brain after a brain injury occurs, in order to try to improve the protection of those important neurons that are important for long-term brain health, for both mental illness as well as cognition. So that's what our lab does. A lot of material synthesis, as well as studying these synthetic materials in biological systems. We mostly work with mice, so studying traumatic brain injury models in mice.
I can speak about my research. I mainly work with nanomaterials, especially with graphene and quantum dots. And one of the ideas that drives a lot of my research is that these nanomaterials, they have normally very nice properties, but the way in which you can integrate them and maximize their properties is not really evident at all. You cannot really say, I'm going to replace silicon with graphene, because that doesn't work, right? I mean, graphene has different properties. So a lot of what I try to do is like find what is the best way to integrate different nanomaterials and try to reduce the power consumption and size of many optoelectronic devices. Like one of the things that I always like is, can we have like a very thin solar cell or a very thin multispectrometer that we can easily integrate into mobile devices. That's one of the things that I like. And talking about how research gives you the chance to do really creative things, even the stuff that you don't know how to do. I actually got into the business of acoustics and metamaterials that now, thanks to Nick, we're pushing that forward. So, I mean, so we're trying to develop materials that would allow us to have ultrasound going to the skull and help to analyze the brain without having any wires inside the brain. And I never did any neuroscience, I never did any acoustics or materials, but that's the beauty of science, that if you have good ideas, they'll let you do something about it. And also because of that, I now work with Nick, right? And we have a good collaboration, and this nice environment about science that is really open to develop new ideas. Thanks.
I might follow that up since I got the introduction from Oscar here. So yeah, no, Oscar and I work together. We have a lot of fun doing it. Yeah, so essentially in my lab, at a broad level, we're trying to make materials with new beneficial properties, specifically mechanical properties under dynamic loading. So in this case, in the project Oscar and I work together on, this is creating materials that can act as high performance lenses for ultrasound. But also we use this in a wide variety of areas. We do have a lot of DoD relevant applications, for instance. So I have a couple projects on impact mitigation. And so like an example of where we might create a dynamically responsive property in a material is like sand or granular materials are quite interesting in that, sandbags have been used forever to stop projectiles. But at the same time, if you go take a pencil, you can stick a pencil very slowly through a sandbag, no problem. And so this is sort of an example of how these materials under dynamic contexts can manifest this new property. And so, for instance, for impact mitigation, what we try to do is I say, building better sandbags. So, we want to do something like take a hammer strike that's caused by an impact and turn it into a series of small taps. So we're not reducing the amount of energy, but we're just moving it around in time and space. So, but yet one hurts and one doesn't. So that's sort of the types of problems we're interested in.
Actually, I didn't know what you guys, some of you, my colleagues were doing. So this is actually kind of fun for me to be learning as well. So I'm actually studying a disease that is affecting the arteries on your lungs. It's called pulmonary arterial hypertension. And basically look at it from a multi-scale approach, meaning we like to go, like studying the physiology, organ level physiology, the tissue mechanics, to the cellular signaling mechanisms that, and how they relate across the scales. And yeah, that's, so basically we study arteries in the lungs and the right ventricle of the heart.
Okay, great. Any last thoughts?
Let me briefly mention some of the research work of mine. A lot of my doctoral and subsequent work was on developing theoretical models and computational tools to study magnetic phenomena at the nanoscale and their implications for emerging nanotechnologies such as magnetic memories and logic and other devices such as microwave nano oscillators. And then more recently, I have been working with colleagues in the Jacobs School of Engineering in the area of education research to explore ways to modify assessment methods to better gauge students' understanding on the conceptual level of subjects that we're teaching them. So for example, we were interested in finding most appropriate means to offer multiple routes for students to demonstrate their knowledge on the exam beyond the traditional written format. So for example, including oral component and assessing to what extent that improves students' learning habits and overall learning outcomes.
Okay, thank you. So I will move on to the next question. So why do you believe students should get involved in research?
That's a better way to learning of what you're studying in class. I think the main goal is, you know, we teach you in class the tools, but how to actually problem solve them and apply them and connect all the dots. That's really where you can do this, is actually in a research environment. You know, unfortunately, often I find as an instructor, professor, that in my class, there's so many homeworks I can give you, right? Or so many projects I can give you for you to put everything together. But it's in research where you really have to find that, I mean, work those out. And there's no answer, which are 99% of the time, right? And it's more like, doesn't matter if you get an answer or not, or if it's right or wrong in a way. It's more about the process of how you reach and analyze a problem.
I guess I'll give my 2 cents here. You know, I try to support a fair amount of undergraduate research. I think we've had about you know, 10 to 15 for the past few years. Not all at the same time, but you know, mostly over the summer. And I like supporting that just because I think it made a big difference in my own career development. So as I sort of alluded to, you know, I was not the best undergraduate student to start out. But getting involved in research, even though I didn't intend to do a PhD and become a professor, really sort of changed that trajectory, and I think it got me excited about, you know, using what I was learning in classes. It got me excited about what sorts of problems are out there and something to sink my teeth into. But also, I think it gave me access, like direct access to mentors whose advice I don't think I even knew I needed at the time. So, you know, it just really, there's a great benefit in having somebody say, hey, here's how the system works. You know, this will make your life easier. And can just sort of builds up from there. So, you know, I think aside from being fun and interesting, it made a big difference in my own career trajectory.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it made a big difference in my career trajectory as well. I think it helps, you know, as an undergrad, you don't really know what direction you might want to go, or you think you do, but I think until you really get your hands dirty and, you know, try applying things yourself, it's hard to really know. So I think it helps with just determining what you're actually interested in. For me, I found that, you know, wet lab research, it was very solitary for me. I realized the type of research itself wasn't exactly for me. So I think just the experience helps kind of guide where you might want to go. And then I also think that it's a good experience compared to just doing your problem sets, where maybe your homeworks, you're given like step by step, sort of this is how you should like approach this problem. And I think research, as Daniela was saying, is very open-ended, and there's not really a clear exact set path or set answer. And I think that's important. I find that a lot of students who just maybe take their classes don't really know how to approach this kind of open-ended problem. So.
Something that was really exciting for me when I first started doing research was the idea that what I was observing with my own eyes and making with my own hands had probably never been done before ever, like in the world. And that was really exciting and really motivated kind of both my excitement to go into lab and do research, but also my studies and wanting to learn more to like make that happen. And so I think a lot of that is drove like kind of my interest, and also finding a really fulfilling profession for me, like a lifelong profession.
Yeah, I think all what my colleagues have mentioned are really, really important. I may add also a little bit of, you know, developing like these soft skills about working in team. You know, when you do research, you will have to be working with other people. You'll have to learn from people. Maybe you also have to train other people that will join later your lab. So you will also get like different kind of skills that they will be really appreciated by later if you get a real job in an industry environment, for example. And just talking about like other, like why it's also good to do research, for example, there's a good, I mean, I have always getting like calls from potential employers that ask me a reference. You know, you just have a phone call about one of the applicants who was doing research in my lab. And, if I know well these students, I can definitely speak good things about them, right? On the other hand, I have had some students they took classes with me. I was their instructor, and I really cannot say much about them because I just know them in the classroom environment, right? So, if you do some research in a lab, potentially you have and you do a good work, potentially you can get a good recommendation from your professor, and that later can make a big difference to get your first employment.
Any other thoughts on this topic, or should I move on to the next question? Okay, I think I will move on. So this next question has been asked in different forms all over the place, whether it's in the Google form we sent out and in the chat. Basically, what are you looking for in an undergraduate student or even a graduate student when they approach you to help you with your research? Or what advice can you give to someone who wants to approach a professor about a potential topic and how they can explore different topics, all the kind of stuff on how to get started and get involved?
So maybe I'll start out because I saw that question in the chat and answered it a slightly different way in terms of how you should approach and maybe not so much when and what to ask. I would say that the beginning of every quarter is often a very busy time for faculty. Within the first 2 weeks, I probably get an email or two per day from undergraduates interested in doing something in the lab. I think that it's probably more fruitful for students to take one of two different paths. The first might be to get to know people that are working in the lab, whether they're TAing a class that you're taking, or it may be a little bit difficult in this sort of pandemic situation, but just emailing students, they are much more likely to answer and be really positive. And if you're emailing faculty, don't get frustrated if they don't respond. 1 or 2 emails is probably a good thing, but the more that you pester someone, the less likely they are to be inclined to answer and to be positive. I've had some students in the past also call me on my office phone, and that's usually not the best way to get a hold of faculty, especially in the sort of COVID world these days, because a lot of people are working from home. So I would suggest going to websites like the one that I put in the chat, which is REAL, so real.ucsd.edu. That is the Research Experience and Applied Learning portal. That's one good suggestion, or one good website. There was another one, Academic Enrichment Programs, or AEP.ucsd.edu is another good way to connect with those that have already expressed an interest in getting students to help with research. So those are both good avenues. Another way would be to apply to summer research programs. So that way you get research experience over the summer. It was a little difficult this year with coronavirus, but obviously future years that won't be hopefully quite an issue. So those are always great. I run a summer program for bioengineering. There are summer programs throughout UCSD that are both discipline specific as well as more generic. And most of those are actually listed on the Academic Enrichment Programs website, so aep.ucsd.edu. And I'll defer to others to talk about what you might want to say.
Maybe I can mention one observation that sometimes undergraduate students not very familiar with research and wanting to join a particular faculty or group go, of course, to the website to get some elementary understanding of what the research is about before they approach and discuss with faculty member potential to join. But then a lot of the publications that are on the websites of faculty can be very technical, and sometimes students get discouraged that they do not have the prerequisite knowledge or skills to engage meaningfully in the research, which is really not the not the best impression, since faculty typically have very nice projects where undergraduate students can successfully engage in and gain all the technical competence they need on the fly if they're motivated. So it's a wonderful experience, and many suitable projects for undergraduates, so they should definitely seek such opportunities.
Yeah, I think just to jump off some of what the existing comments were about finding research positions, you know, so I think in terms of getting it, you know, so one, you know, showing enthusiasm, I had mentioned that in the chat. Two, I think if you are emailing a professor, keep a very concise and professional email. Like, so, you know, if it's longer than 4 lines, we're probably not going to read it. Just saying. You know, just keep it short and to the point, attach a, you know, your resume, and and then wait and be patient. And also just, I would say, make sure that, you know, you do have time available to do it if professor says, okay, you know, come on, you can start, so that you can make sure you can make a good impression. And you know, I think I'd mentioned if you happen to be in their class and you do well in their class and get to talk to them through office hours and so on, I think that's a really good path. But you know, with the way that, you know, there's a good chance that you won't be able to take their class, so that definitely is not a prerequisite. Now, in terms of, so I completely agree with Adam. Definitely don't call them on the phone. That's sort of invasive. So showing up their door can be, you know, borderline invasive. But, you know, I think I've had cases certainly where I'm just overwhelmed at a given time when a student emails me. And then if they email me, like, say, like a month, 2 months later, just say, hey, just a reminder, I usually don't mind that. Right. But if it's like multiple times a day, like, why haven't you responded? Why haven't you responded? Then they're definitely off the list. Like, so, you know, I think just be professional, polite, and patient, and maybe persistent too while we're alliterating. So to the right amount. So.
I usually like to make, and this is actually something I usually tell students. So for me, as I said in the chat, I do really like people to be motivated, curious, and tenacious. I can teach you the physics, the math, the programming, but I can't teach you that interest, or that basically your work ethic. So the one thing I do tell my students, though, is that if they want to join, I do like to make sure that if the students come to join my lab, that I keep an eye on them. You know, are they doing any classes? What are they planning on doing? Are they taking GREs or not? And I'm happy to talk to them about grad school or like other possibilities. But because I tell them that I put that time and effort into them and into training them, I also ask them often not to just come in and do 1 quarter. Ask them at least for 2 quarters, or 3. And again, because first of all, I think when it comes to the research, often you may start, say you start pipetting, or you start doing something very basic, you're not really gonna get much out of it. So if you're gonna do it, I want you to have some commitment to it. And that way it's beneficial for both sides. For me, the time we spent putting into teaching you, but also for you to get something out of it.
I may also add that, you know, I guess especially for students who don't have research experience, it might be difficult, right, to get that first opportunity. So, you know, try also different professors, right? Don't try to just get, oh, I want to do research with this professor. And try different ones. And it's a little bit like finding a job, right? I mean, sometimes perhaps you won't get the job, or, you know, you won't get exactly in the lab that you wanted, but just start to learn about research. You know, you will see that sometimes the actual research work is different from what you have in mind, right? So, you know, like a lot of students get excited about working with quantum dots, and once they found that they have to spend like 3 hours in front of a bench spin coating, they're like, oh, this is not what I wanted, right? So, and you know, it can be different, but you know, I think the main thing is, you know, once you get one opportunity, once you get experience, then you can actually get a good letter of recommendation. You might get a poster out of it, and then with that, you can, you know, you have a better resume that later you can join a different lab, you know, 1 year later, getting closer to what you already have in your, you know, in your CV and your background. So, you know, also that go step by step. You know, if you don't get a position exactly in the lab that you want, that's not a terrible thing. You know, for the first time, whatever chance you have, it's always good to start.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just had one more thing. I guess for my lab, at least, we typically have kind of open lab meetings at least every so often. So we let other, you know, people who maybe aren't doing research in the lab, who are interested in learning more about the lab, come and listen in and hear how things are going. And I think that's how I found some of the best undergrad students that I have working in the lab right now, is they were the ones who would come back every single time, start to participate, ask questions. I think that's also can be a good way to get involved in different labs as well.
Anything else? Okay, so another pretty common question that we have here is, do you have any advice for students who are juggling a lot of things at once? Academics, part-time job, another internship, and they also want to do research. Do you have any advice for them about time management, and I guess how to stay sane while balancing so many things at once?
I'm of the idea of do less, but better than more than not that great. So I think it's granted that working sometimes it's needed, but definitely if you want to do research, or even if you're doing some internship or something, you want to make sure that you can allocate the time it deserves, because the worst that you can have is of not having a letter of recommendation is a poor one or a very generic one.
I would add to that, my advice, whether it's for incoming graduate students or transfer students or students starting as freshmen, the quarter system is a different beast when compared to semester systems. Most high schools are semester based, so even if you're coming in from high school, it's going to be different. So I always encourage people to, and especially given the climate now, take a little while, make sure that you know, courses are okay and that you're able to handle those first before trying to jump into additional activities like volunteering in a lab. And I would echo what Dr. Valdez-Jasso said. You don't want to spread yourself thin and ultimately end up with a negative experience in someone's lab, because you know, the worst thing would be a hole in your CV where maybe you don't list that person and someone says, oh, well, what were you doing for those 2 or 3 years? So it's better to make sure that you have positive outcomes with courses, and then sort of build from there and think about research or think about an extracurricular activity. And when you do consider doing research, there is the concern, I think, from students to have a lot of breadth. So that way I might work on one project for half a year and a different project for another half of the year, and jump around. It's better though, I think, to try to have depth in your research experiences. So you're only here for a brief time, maybe working, like finding that one lab that really makes sense for you and is a good fit. Or if you find multiple labs where the first one doesn't work out and you transition to a different lab, and this is all based on the research topic, being able to explain that story of how you went from one topic to another and ultimately came up something that fits your interests, I think is very important. I sometimes use the analogy of a damped oscillator. So you want, it's okay to have big oscillations right now. But by the time that you're graduating, hopefully you found whatever is that niche that really excites you. And if that means you had to course correct a couple of times early on, hopefully those experiences weren't very long and lengthy, and you can have a really long, in-depth experience by the time that you graduate in 2 or 3 years' time.
I was just going to add that, yeah, I agree with what everyone's been saying. And I think part of the question as well was about time management and any recommendations we would have. So I don't know, I can offer a few tips that I think work for me. And I think time management is especially important now when we're all sort of working from home and it's a different environment than we're used to. But for me, I think that really sort of planning out, I plan out my week ahead of time, even putting things into your calendar as specific as like things you're gonna do for 30 minutes at a time. I think that sort of is very helpful in figuring out, at least for me, things that I find more difficult to do. For me, I need to do those in the morning. So kind of figuring out what parts of your day are best to do particular tasks or maybe study particular subjects. I think that can help a lot in terms of not wasting any time and making sure that you make the most use of your time when you are trying to sit down and study and get things done.
And just to add on those responses, I mean, yeah, 100% agree with everything that's been said. I think doing fewer things better with more depth is the choice path, I would say. Some strategies and some considerations on how and why to do that. So one thing's in terms of work time management strategies, I mentioned in the chat, but I think if this is something that I didn't do as an undergrad, and I sure as heck wish I did, and picked up later, but if you treat undergraduate like a job and make sure you're at least committing like a solid 8 hours a day, whether you got to go to the library and just lock yourself in there for 8 hours or whatever, I think that's critical, just to stay focused and really make sure you're putting the time in and not getting distracted. And then also, in terms of not getting involved in too many things, and I would say, I also agree, I probably would not suggest to jump into research like your first quarter here. I think, and part of the reason is when you're going to be applying for things later, which is sort of the goal with this, is to get where you want to go and, learn the things you need to get where you want to go. One of the major criteria is going to be GPA. So, research in my mind is a bonus on top of GPA. If somebody has a very, very poor GPA coming out, but some research experience, that's not enough to sway me. So I would personally suggest making sure your grades are in place, you feel solid about your courses, and then start doing research. And then the other thing you might consider, this probably won't match the UCSD's line, but, and I know there's some financial implications for it, but you also might consider, when people are looking at hiring people for grad school or companies, they don't care if you took 4 or 5 years. If you stretch out your courses for a little bit longer, you can often do a lot better in all of them. So that's something to think about. But again, that's not the official line. That's just my 2 cents. So.
I just want to add a little bit on what everyone else said, but some labs have work study so that if you need to be employed, maybe you can consider work study as an entry into a research lab to understand the environment. And then maybe another strategy to balance your time is to do research in the summer if you need to be working during this academic school year. Dr. Engler mentioned some nice summer programs, and those are often comes with stipends so that you could potentially take a gap in working if you can get paid in the summertime for research. So those are maybe a couple of strategies to maintain income flow while also getting research done.
I would agree with all that has been said, and just reiterate the importance of performing well in your courses and not jeopardizing that by engaging in too many activities simultaneously, since really the knowledge we pick up in those core courses at the very beginning of the undergraduate program are going to give you the foundation upon which all your subsequent understanding is going to build upon. So if you have gaps in that foundation, you're going to have a lot of troubles in that edifice of knowledge you're trying to build up going forth, and spend a lot of time in repairs, so to speak. And that's really going to then slow you, in fact, down. So I think that's good advice that I think was joint advice from all of the faculty here.
Okay, any last comments on that? Okay, so another common question has kind of been touched on before, but this is sort of a timing question. When are you most open to taking new students for your research labs? Is it too late to apply now? Just kind of the timing of when students can try to get involved. I know that's kind of a tough question.
For me, it's just any time, just be patient. You know, it may not, you know, if you really want to start in the fall, it may not happen, right? Maybe it'll be winter, but you know, you're welcome to start talking now or whenever you want.
Yeah, and also depends, because sometimes today you might be asking me if we need some more members in the lab, and I'd be like, no, but tomorrow I may find that we need to redesign something in the device or something, or like, oh yeah, sure, actually I have a project. So I would say, again, as Dr. Boechler said, anytime really.
And I think in addition to timing, making sure that you're casting a wide net. I see this problem with bioengineering students all the time, in that they think they can only work with the 35 faculty in our department and do something that's, you know, topical. But there are many people in the School of Medicine that are very applicable in terms of what they do, and also in nanoengineering. You know, if you're an MAE student, there might be opportunities in, say, physics that would be of interest. So not just timing, but who you're asking, I think, is important, and make sure that you cast as wide a net as possible.
Yeah, and one thing that just occurred to me that you might consider too, that I think I've done this for a couple students, but you know, if you do have if you're taking a class and you have a professor that you like, and you know, you've gotten to know them through office hours and stuff, even if they don't have particular spots open, or they don't have the area of expertise that you're particularly interested in, you can say, hey, could you help connect me or make some recommendations to other professors? So that's also a possibility. I mean, I think anytime you can network like that, it helps.
A little bit adding on that, I also have I had one student. He took a class with me when he was in his first year. He told me he was interested in research, but that he wanted to get his class first, getting the right track on his lectures. So he contacted me one semester, yeah, 2 quarters later, and you know, just because I knew that he was already interested in research, I really took his application to work in my lab seriously, and he did excellent 2 years later in my lab. So you know, just maybe if at that moment you feel that you want to really get your coursework in place, it doesn't prevent you from talking to the professor that you're interested in later joining his lab, and you know, showing that you have good grades, that you're interested in his lab. Then you already have you already have the attention of the professor in that sense. And actually also that student later, he switched to a different lab and he did excellent work with me. So I was happy to recommend him with other professors.
Newer faculty as well are also much more likely to say yes, simply because, you know, they might be a lab of one. I remember I said yes to anyone that walked in the door in my first 6 months. Not literally, but now I just, whatever my graduate students and postdocs say, if they need something, I can hand them a stack of CDs, but you know, the response rate's not as good.
Anyone else have anything to add? Okay, so I guess a kind of to branch off of that previous question, how can students tell which labs are open? Again, you guys kind of briefly touched on that. And especially right now, since things are remote, coming in as a student now, I can imagine is very difficult. So do you have any advice for how to see what is open right now? What's going on in this remote world? What advice do you have about that?
I think Daniela wrote it in the chat, but I think the best way is what we've been saying. You need to reach out to professors individually. Everyone kind of does something different, and kind of show interest, see what their research is about. And I think that's kind of the only way that I can suggest to go about doing it.
And Dr. Kwon had mentioned work study, but another possibility for credit. Every department that's represented here today, we have 199 classes where you can do things for credit. But also another thing that's not often utilized is the academic internship program, or AIP. And so that's another mechanism where you can get internship credit. It's much less likely to be on campus, but maybe at an affiliated institution around La Jolla, or at a company. If you're interested in getting that sort of experience, it's another resource to think about. So it's AIP. There are a lot of acronyms, I understand, but.
Maybe if you have ever had any interest in a dry lab or programming or modeling project, this would be the time to follow that curiosity. So I think that labs that do a lot of remote, like dry lab computer work, this would be a good opportunity to explore that. And maybe, I don't do that much dry labs, so maybe others can speak to that. But I know that some of my colleagues who run more programming type of research projects are, they're running business as usual, whereas some of us who do more experimental work, I've been having to say no to most of my students until at least winter or spring.
We actually just do, so we do a lot of computational work, but we do also a lot of animal work. And actually right now we have very limited capacity. Only 25% of our lab members can come, and they have to be pre-cleared and so forth. But what we've looked of taken advantage of the fact is of people not being able to come is to actually reorganize our stuff. So a lot of my students have been involved in actually working on helping us with databases and reorganizing our inventories and stuff, which is something that, I'm probably one of the few good things about this pandemic, being that, it has given us time to like declutter and reorganize things. So, and again, you might sound like boring, but actually by doing that, students have been looking into like, oh, we have this extra data we never use. We should probably use it for, XYZ. So, yeah, so there's even new things to be done in a lab, even if it's not physically there.
Okay. So, and I know that you guys are being very active in the chat, so thank you so much. I'm having a hard time looking all at once, so if things get answered in the chat, thank you so much for doing that. I just want to briefly mention again, at about 2:30, I'm going to try to transition to an open Q&A where you guys can answer anything. We're still kind of going back through the chat to make sure everything gets answered here. So again, since we're starting to run a little short on time, try to keep questions and answers a little more concise, just so we can try to get to everything. So next question, a common thread is asking, what basic things are required for students entering the lab, whether it's coursework that you'd prefer them to have? Do you want them to have coursework relevant to your lab? Are there any basic skills that are like a definite need to have before they join? I know that can kind of fall into that whole rabbit hole of you need experience to get an experience. So how do you have any basic needs like that that you would prefer incoming students have in your lab?
I mean, I can give an example for our lab. I mean, I think, again, I do encourage people to try to get involved, early. But for me, I find most success a little bit later in the undergraduate careers. So I think it can be harder for me, for my type of research I do, if students have not had statics or preferably like the first level of structural mechanics or solid mechanics 1. So generally that works better. So I think that's usually like a second, very early third year set of courses. So yeah, but there's been exceptions certainly.
I like students to have a pretty strong set of fundamentals. So chemistry, physics, math, just, solidly know those, because those are pretty hard to teach the fundamentals in a lab setting. But in terms of experimental, my intention is to teach all of those in the lab. And I actually like students with a blank slate, because I think it's easier to teach it than to reteach bad habits out. So sometimes I like students actually not to have too much experience, although it just varies student to student. And so I think for me, the main attitude is just, I think everyone said enthusiasm and motivation. So what does that mean? That means like, did you read papers associated to the lab and like have a specific interest and know the details about what's going on in lab? And then I think a learning mindset, which means, I think I saw some in the comments that most of our research fails like 90% of the time. And it's a very humbling experience. And every day, I think all of us always feel humbled by our research, because there's so much we don't know. And so the kind of attitude it takes to do research is really one of an open mind and being willing to just fail and do it again, and listen to others and learn. And so that's something I try to look for in when I'm recruiting new undergraduate students. So a student who's willing to adapt and learn, rather than someone who thinks they know everything and maybe is not as adaptable to being ready to take in new information. So that's a little bit vague, but yeah, basically just showing an interest in the details of the actual research that's going on in the lab is for me the most important.
I would add on to that I think that most undergraduates discount their coursework that's laboratory related. And so I would encourage people, whether it's in your CV or a cover letter or just in the quick email that you send, say, hey, I've already had, I'm a bioengineering junior, I've taken BENG 172 or MAE 170 or, whatever your lab might be. Mention that. That's still lab experience.
I would briefly mention in computational work, often undergraduate students with hardly any experience can get involved in certain aspects, such as building models in CAD software, maybe learning a new discretization application, how to go about it, and then conveying that information to the other group members, as well as some basic, if student knows programming language, some of basic data analysis, that reading from data files and performing statistical analysis, which could be a way to get more familiar with the work and then in time get to the more perhaps interesting parts of the research.
I would also recommend that the student, if you're gonna talk with the professor, try to know what they're doing in their lab, what kind of procedures they do. And if you have already done something that is similar to that, put it in the lab, right? Show to the professor that you already have a look or ask about more or less what kind of research they do in the lab and what kind of things you already know that can be helpful for them, right? Show that you have tried to prepare yourself to be in that lab. Having said that as well, keep in mind that at least in nanomaterials, we always spend time preparing the materials, preparing the instrumentation that is also complicated. Sometimes, using an evaporator and stuff like that can take time. So I think the students have also to be like open-minded that it will take time for you to learn how to use the equipment. So take into account that you will probably have to read the manuals and read this procedure operation, and don't expect that you will just come and start doing experiments right away and getting results. So be patient about it. So perhaps at least in nanomaterials, sometimes we don't expect that you already know how to prepare the nanomaterials, but keep in mind that you will have to spend time reading the materials, repeating the procedures until you have your own stuff to work on. So be patient as well.
Anyone have anything else to add? Okay, so we also have a few questions about mentorship. So, for example, what are your personal approaches towards mentorship? And I think some of these were answered in the chat. Yeah, so I guess what are your personal approaches to mentorship? I'm not sure what was exactly said in the chat. Maybe reiterate something that was said there in case someone missed it. Undergraduate mentors, or mentees, I should say. I hope that's a specific enough question.
I would just encourage people, mentorship can come in a variety of styles, and it can come in a variety of topics. I think all too often students at UCSD immediately glom onto research and don't think about career mentorship or mentorship and advice with coursework. At least in bioengineering, every student is paired with an academic advisor that is a faculty member that you can go and ask questions about career, job prospects, coursework, all that stuff. We also have a student affairs team that does 3,600 visits a year in person. Well, now everything's virtual right now. But the point being, don't just think that mentorship is you and a faculty member talking about a research interest. It can take many different forms.
I think this is often what I talk to grad students. It's often, at the end of the day, it also has to do a lot with chemistry and style. Some professors might be more hands-on than others. And so that's just something you learn from. I think best or easiest way is to just asking people around. How do they interact with their mentors, their research advisors in this particular case? And I also invite a lot of students to, when they take my class and stuff, to reach out if they need something. Sometimes they get me into this kind of things, right, Anna? So, just some people are just more, open about it, maybe less, but it's just different styles. It's just, reaching out. If they say no, then that's it. You move on to another professor. I do like to make sure with my students, because for me, maybe because I'm junior professor, basically I'm not, the bottom rank of the professors here. It's, for me also, it reflects upon me how well my students do. So I take very seriously when somebody joins my lab to make sure, okay, where they go next, not just, well, I want them to succeed and do well, but it also is going to be a very important reflection of me as a professor. So.
Anyone have anything else to add about mentorship? Okay, so in a few minutes, we'll switch over to an open Q&A. In the meantime, another question we have prepared here is back to more general topics. What has been your most rewarding experience in research? And relatedly, have you had a struggle that really helped shape your mindset or career or anything like that? Or is there anything you would have done differently now that you're looking back?
Actually, I'll start with that one. I mentioned how I did an REU research experience for undergrads as an undergraduate student. And while I was starting to do research for a project, I needed to, well, I was in applied math department, basically. So we didn't have experiments or data. It was everything done piece of paper or computers. And I needed to get a project actually evolving. I was looking for papers to see where I could, certain measurements that I needed from the cardiovascular system. And I browsed through the literature, couldn't really find, except that I found this paper that was published in the Spanish Journal of Cardiology. And it was in Spanish. And I'm from Mexico, fluent in Spanish. And I started reading it, and then I reached out to the authors, the experimentalists actually, they were actually from Uruguay in South America. And I reached out to them. I asked them that I wanted to validate some of my models and if I could use some of their data to see if I could. And they were incredibly generous, and we established this collaboration. And with them is actually people who I start publishing. So for me, it worked out. For them, it was very much, I don't know if there's any Latinos here, but there's this connection with the Latinos about like, okay, sort of sisterhood, brotherhood. And so they were very happy to help me because I was, especially I was Mexican and so forth. And so, that will end up being a really nice connection. The fact that maybe if my other students had reached out, I don't know if they would have been willing to share data. Not many people share data, right? And so for me, that was a very rewarding thing that my extracurricular characteristics help with my research.
Any other rewarding experiences or struggles or things you would do differently?
I would say, we've had some cautionary notes about immediately jumping into research, but I think one of the most rewarding things about it is that feeling when we're sitting around a table, we've just, someone in the lab has analyzed some data and you confirm a hypothesis. That is, if you have to think of research as a drug, like that's the high that you get, is where that only the people sort of sitting around that table right now know the answer to whatever your hypothesis was. And no one else in the world knows that because you haven't written the paper, you haven't presented the data anywhere. And so not that it's sort of your little secret, but it's this feeling of accomplishment that we now know something that we didn't know. And I think I was the person who had in the chat said something about with imposter syndrome, just know that faculty are wrong, 2/3 of the time, and I'm wrong 90% of the time. So that 10% when it happens is really cool.
I'd say on the I guess things to do differently note, I would say, so for me, I think I came out of, I remember as an undergraduate, I came out of high school and things were pretty easy and I could do well in school without too much effort. I know that's not the case for everybody. but two things I would do if I went back is, one, really focus on learning the material well instead of doing well. Those are definitely two separate things. And because you will likely pay for it later if you don't learn it well. I think Marco had mentioned getting the fundamentals down, and I think that's really important. And then also, at least for me, this might be a specific thing, but like I had finished all the math I need like very early. So I took several years of break from math courses, and then tried to hit it again in grad school, and it goes away very quickly. So maybe just, you know, keep revisiting that, even if you have to take more advanced classes. So.
Actually, I want to mention something. It's not completely directly to the question, but Nicolas mentioned something. So as I said, I transferred from a community college to a four-year college, NC State, and I was a really good student in the community college as well. But there were many differences, and I think the one thing I just want you guys keep an eye on is study habits. I had them and they were good and it worked. But the difference was that because I was in a community college, I had been taking classes that were like the electives. So I came into NC State, and I realized how suddenly all my classes were like all for my major. And so I didn't have that many classes to like weaken the load in a way. And so that was a shocker. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that I wasn't in disadvantage with the other students because I have gotten a very good education. But the disadvantage was that the other students had already been there for 2 years prior than I had. And so they already knew where was, you know, the cool place in the library to be quiet and study, or they knew where to use the school software, Canvas, right? So that was really like the part that I felt a disadvantage of, just less experience of what there was on campus as opposed to them. So what I would encourage you is to basically get to know people that have been there as well, that been here from the beginning, and just learn from them, like what are the tricks or some of the things to do. Also, because I remember the first semester that I entered, I just chose, morning class for some of my math classes. And I didn't realize that with the students, they already had said, oh, that's not the greatest professor. Like the best professor is this other one, right? And so, just steps like that I was not aware of because I had just joined in, right? So definitely just things to keep in mind. It's not like, if you're already good students, you already got to the program, it's very hard to get to UCSD as a transfer student. So, you guys are great, making it here. It's not easy. And, but I just don't want you guys to also get disillusioned or scared away by coming in when there's just even disadvantage of knowing the campus less than those already here.
Anything else to add?
Maybe I can share one experience that was rewarding to me. It's a research experience, not an undergraduate research experience, a very early one, though a graduate, nevertheless, research experience, an internship that I got to go to in my, I think it was second year of graduate studies, to Western Digital Corporation in Longmont, Colorado. And there I was tasked with developing a simulator based on certain novel approaches that were being developed in my advisors group. And it was very rich experience because the project involved applied physics and engineering, geometrical analysis, all different kinds of also various applications I got to learn and use for visualization. And ultimately, there was a product at the end that was very successful, and that gave me a great sense of accomplishment, especially this being one of my first research projects. So I think always your first, whatever it is, research activity or otherwise, is going to hold a special place. And I got to later go to various international conferences to present the work, which got favorably received. And also doing research, at least at some portion, if possible, at the company, is nice to sample the culture there and to get a little bit insight into the dynamic in the industry.
For me, I think I regret not being a little bit more adventurous when I was an undergraduate. I think I realized as I keep going on in life, maybe this is an illusion that I still need to get over, but it seems like your opportunity to try new things become more and more limited as you keep going. And so in the university, you can do a summer internship in, something that you have an interest in, and later on, like, no one will really think of it that you took a summer off to do something that you're interested in, and that's totally okay. And it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's the last opportunity, but I think those opportunities get smaller and smaller. And so I wanted to say that at least in bioengineering, I know we have a really fantastic internship coordinator, Isgard, who can help you latch or connect you to company internships. And I think that those are really great opportunities in summer where you can usually get paid to do something that you might have interest in and explore. And it's a nice opportunity that that you can do. Those internships typically are not open to outside the university environment. You're now either have a job or you're in graduate school. Although I did an internship when I was in graduate school as well, but that was very rare. Most advisors did not like students doing internships. So I think it is a nice really time to do, to explore opportunities around that. I don't think as, I went to UC Berkeley, so similar to UCSD, it's a huge campus with many, many undergraduates. I think I just was kind of narrow-minded in, as a student. I think I was, kind of shy, a little bit afraid of trying new things. And so that's something I think I would say that looking back, I think I had more freedom than I thought. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we can go ahead and open it up to an open Q&A. So if you have a question, I think to keep things orderly, I'll ask you if you could use the raise hand feature so you don't have a bunch of people asking at once. And I'll call your name so you can ask your question. And continue to ask in the chat. It looks like it's still buzzing over there. So thank you all for keeping that going. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand in the raise your hand feature so we can see.
Don't be shy.
If you can't find the raise your hand button, it's okay to just unmute as well. It's in the participants tab if you need to look for it. If you open the participants tab, it should be like a blue hand.
I think Alex Moretti has a question.
Alex, just unmute and ask.
Yeah.
No, I was, sorry. My name is Alex. I'm an aerospace engineer student. And my question was, I'm kind of interested in relating aerospace to the vehicle industry. And I'm not sure if I would be so inclined to go into research, but is it a good idea to be involved anyways to see if a work experience could be, the place to be? Because I know some people tell me that whenever you start working, you might lose interest and you might be discouraged, or if you get a internship, for instance. So maybe a research program could be a better way to get your feet in the water before actually getting into internships and works?
I can give my 2 cents. I mean, I think, I think it's been mentioned earlier, casting a wide net's always a good idea. I mean, because there's never a guarantee you'll get either the internships or the co-ops or the research positions. But I think any of those can be very beneficial. I mean, a research position, I think, counts about equal weight as an internship. So an undergraduate research position. I think it's definitely worthwhile, and I think it looks good on your resume, and I think you learn really valuable skills and perspectives. On the other hand, one thing I mentioned that is really, really, really important is, setting yourself up to have, I would say, at least 3 strong recommendation letters by the time you leave university. So that's whether you're going to industry or academia. That'll be my opinion. And so the best ways you can do that is activities like research. I mean, I definitely have had students come to me and say, oh, I was in your class. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? I'd never talked to them once. They never came to office hours or something, but okay. So I mean, all I can write is, they got an A- in my class. They seemed like an okay person. And that's not really what you're looking for, right? You want somebody that'll write glowing words about you. So just building those relationships, I think there's a hidden value to that.
Since it doesn't look like we have a ton of live questions, just feel free to unmute yourself. You don't have to worry about the raise hand thing, since there's not that many questions here. And if you can't, if you don't have access to a microphone, you can also continue to ask questions in the chat.
I'll go ahead. Hi, my name is Matt. I'm a nano engineering major, but I'm actually really interested in like nuclear energy and nuclear materials. Just to generalize it, if you are kind of, I've been reading through some of the faculty research, trying to find something that I'm interested in. If you don't see something that necessarily like relates to your interests, or how would you suggest someone to continue pursuing a focus while at the same time like taking advantage of what our department has to offer? If that makes any sense.
So one thing just for nuclear energy research, and I think this has been said earlier, but you definitely want to cast a wide net looking outside your department. So there's, I'm going to get this wrong, but there's the CER, Center for Energy Research, I think, and they are all about like fusion research, basically. So you might want to go check them out. But then, again, really like, honestly, I think the more I go on, it's with research, it's not, like so for instance, I'll tell graduate students a lot, like when you're getting a PhD, yes, you happen to become a subject matter expert, but that's not really the point. The point is about, the process and ability to solve problems that you develop. So, and I think that's sort of specific area agnostic. So, if you keep that in mind, it might be okay to try other things too.
Thank you.
Also, maybe along those lines, in thinking about casting a wide net, I'm a bioengineer, so this may be totally off, but one of the things that San Diego has a rich history of is activity in military, and a lot of projects may fall under your interest area that might be related to military, or funded by military, but would have more general applications. So that might be also something to look into.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. Just to rip off that, like if you talking about getting a career working in nuclear energy, probably one of the best places you could be is the DOE labs. So that's like, Sandia or Los Alamos. And, so there's a lot of faculty that are involved in collaborative projects with those national labs. And they may not be working on, again, exactly what you want, but that might make it a lot easier to get ins and know people there when the time comes. So, might be something to look for.
Also, so just as a little intermission, very odd, I didn't know this, but I just wrote a proposal for the Department of Defense, and was actually to fund women's health. And because the disease that I study affects 2 to 4 times more women, and they were invited, they're interested in funding that kind of things. So, some agencies also have very broad nets.
Just Matthew, I mean, talking about like you're interested in nuclear physics and you're in the nano engineering program. I found that now it's actually quite easy to, these months, it's very easy to actually register into conferences that are not related to your, to your area, because they are basically online. So you don't have to go to a place to participate in a conference. So you can just register for a conference in the subject that you like. Of course, you have to pay the registration, but you don't have to go there, right? Because most of the conferences are online. So you can still like see what's going on, and maybe they have an aspect of nanotechnology for energy applications, or relations between nuclear physics and nanotechnology, and you might try to find a link between nano engineering, which is your program, and the stuff that you like. So at least I found that I can attend many conferences this in fall because I don't have to go there. So since most of them are remote, it's easy to kind of participate. Of course, you have to pay the registration, but you don't have to be there. So.
Just a quick question. Is there a point where, professors work one-on-one with one student on a research, or is it just a group of people that you guys have?
I started my lab 3 years ago, and so when I first started my lab, I didn't have any graduate students, so I worked directly with my undergraduate students on their own projects. So that lasted about 6 months or so. Now I have each of my undergraduate students work with either postdoc or graduate student directly, so one-on-one mentoring there, and then group mentoring. So I'll join them or do one-on-one mentoring with both the undergraduate student and the graduate student. So I would also say that I'm not opposed to undergraduates having their own individual project, but it just takes a significant amount of motivation and effort on that one undergraduate. And so it would really require maybe 20 hours a week in lab for an individual project for a particular undergraduate student. This will vary a lot, of course, from lab to lab because of the projects, but that's just kind of how it works in my lab.
I'd say my setup's very similar to Ester's. We generally, regardless of undergraduates, graduates, or postdocs, we try to make sort of like multi-experience level teams, small teams, and I generally work individually with the small teams.
Jacob, we can't hear your audio. I know you unmuted, but I don't know why it's not working.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. so mechanical engineering major here. I guess I'm just kind of wondering what you can expect to be doing, having no like research experience, if you were to start researching, I guess. Like,
No, I mean, so that's a good question. I mean, I think it really depends on the professor and the lab and their style. You know, my personal style is I generally try to throw students in the deep end. So, you know, just right off the bat, you know, give them a meaningful project. And, but again, this is usually in the context of a small team. So, you know, I try to give some support structure to that, but it's not like, you know, print something for me on the 3D printer, right? It's something intellectually meaningful. And it's hard, but, you know, I think it ends up being more rewarding. So, but that's just my strategy.
okay. And I guess what would your expectations be as well?
Yeah, I think just clearly have been putting in the time. You know, it's like you can't fault anybody for not knowing stuff. I mean, like, you know, I don't know stuff all the time, like you know, all the time. So it really matters just how you work towards figuring it out. And so, you know, the only times I've been sort of underwhelmed with undergraduate students is, you know, when they come in, they've clearly not, like, you know, you can tell when they haven't really put in any time, you know, if they maybe put in a half hour that whole week or something, you know, you can tell. So, you know, as long as they're talking with the other students in the lab, I mean, and, you know, I think that'll sort of be fed back from the other students in the lab, you know, the more senior students as well, you know, sort of naturally. So I think just putting in the work, you know, good solid, you know, 8-10 hours a week, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
I would always emphasize that it doesn't really matter if things work out or not as well, but just to parlay off or to expand on that thought, positive or negative outcomes, most faculty aren't going to care, but to see that you're invested in the work, I think is the most important aspect of training as an undergrad.
I would like to add also that I think many undergrad students, they are afraid of coming with a wrong answer. Like they say, oh, if I don't have the right answer, they'll think that I cannot do it. I mean, it's not really about like saying, no, I found the response. If you think about it, if you have done the thinking and doing the experiments or the methods to get closer to that answer, that can really lead you to new understanding of things. So it's not about getting the right answer, it's how you get your brain to think about it. And if you're doing the right experiments, the right methodology to get to that answer. And you know, if you show your professor that his hypothesis was wrong, there's not a problem with that if you have the right arguments.
And yeah, I mean, to add on both those comments, I mean, I think even if your process is wrong, just the fact that you're trying a process, right? And I think also communicating what process you used, like, you know, it's great when a student says, hey, you know, I read this article, this is what I sort of figured out, but I got stuck here. And I tried to do this, but I still couldn't figure it out. And like, you know, if they communicate all the things they tried and the work that they put in, that's really helpful. I mean, I've had other students where they say like, oh yeah, I read some articles and like, you know, didn't understand them. Like I can't, it's very hard to help at that stage, but if they show me what they tried and did, great, you know.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that will disqualify a student from doing a research after they joined?
For our lab, it's a big thing is safety. If not operating safely in the lab, they will immediately get banned because you're endangering others. If they're not respectful to other people in lab, whatever that might be, so they're not acting professionally in lab. And then so those are like hard things in our lab. If you're not like those are just things, if you're not following the rules, you will not be able to be in lab. And then the third thing is like, it's a bit of that learning mindset. I have undergraduates who I've taught them the technique twice personally with details, and then they don't have their notebook out, they're not taking notes. So they're telling me like they're not interested in improving on whatever I'm teaching them on. And so if by the third time they're still asking me the same questions that they did the first time, or something I explicitly said several times, I always find that to be a challenging situation, and that goes with the motivation. So if you're a motivated student, you're going to show me that you're not going to be asking the same question several times in a row, because especially when I'm like, this is really important, can you please, get your notebook? And then the next week they come with the same question, then that's going to show me that they're not motivated, basically. In my lab, I do a quarter of trial period for most of my students. So it's a bit of like matchmaking, or a long interview you can think of for the first quarter. And then from there, we'll commit to you. We're married now. And then, we'll put everything into the students who stay in our lab, just like we expect a lot from the students.
I'll just jump in here real quick just to give kind of a 5-minute warning. So maybe finish up answering this, ask maybe one more question, and I'd like to hopefully get everyone out by 3 for our next thing. Okay, continue.
I just want to, well, I already put it, but we are running a program at UCSD in the Jacobs School just to help more Hispanic students to get involved into research. We know that many of Hispanic students, they come from high schools where they don't have many research activities, or community colleges with very little lab activity. So we're trying to set a program trying to give some advice, like this effort today, of how to get into research positions, either internships or summer research experience. So I just put the link on the chat. So if someone is interested, you can follow there. No, it's not only for them. I mean, that's the main focus, but definitely this program is open to everyone.
One last question that I have is, does a student contribution, be it negative or positive in research, affect the other group, be it you guys or, the student that, since this is a group work, does it affect, one student contribution affect the whole research of the whole team, or is it only about that student?
Well, maybe I can mention that in my experience, as well as from insights obtained by other students, of course, group works as a unit, and the group supports each member. So you will be supported by the group as you support the other group members, and collectively march ahead in the research endeavor. But I would just mention, I think it relates also to yours and Jacob's previous questions regarding how to conduct oneself in the lab. So from the experience that I had, and from the insights that I mentioned of other students, it's really the most beneficial experience if you are supported by a team of peers, in addition, of course, to the faculty member. And then you really quickly pick up and know what to do and where your place is. So I would say, for the most beneficial experience, to try to find a group where you're well supported, hopefully by a senior graduate student, or undergraduate or graduate or postdoc, as well as your mentor, that's a faculty member.
Okay, I think that can bring us to the end of our panel. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much to the faculty members for joining us here and for all of that amazing information. And thank you again for being so active in the chat. That is so helpful. And another thing I'd like to quickly add and ask the faculty, we included your email addresses in a page with some bio information. I just want to, I guess, formally ask if you are okay with students emailing you with questions, something maybe they didn't get to ask, or if they're interested. I don't want to just tell everyone that on your behalf. So I guess just give a little thumbs up if you're okay with students emailing you with the emails we provided.
Brenda, do you mind asking, I'm putting my thumb up. You mentioned some Google form. I don't want to miss any information but I'm not, maybe I misunderstood. In addition to emails, and is there anything else that, any other resource that is also something we should be aware of where we can contribute?
Yeah, the Google form was just sent out to our participants. You don't have to worry about that. We didn't get a ton of responses anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So thank you for asking, but you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so thank you everyone once again. This was so much fun. We learned a lot. I learned a lot. And I will go ahead and conclude the session. Thank you all for coming, and I'll just quickly remind everyone that at 3:30 to please, and this is for our transfer students, please join your T-Prep leaders meeting. Not the main meeting yet.
Good luck with everything, guys, and look forward to seeing you on campus one day.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. And welcome.